Hey there, come sit close to the fire with me. Let the room stay dim. Let the candlelight rest on the edges of things. How did Samhain's sacred night become Halloween candy and costumes? It sounds like an easy change, like a mask swapped for another mask. But the older truth is darker and quieter, and it clings to the skin of the year. In the ancient Gaelic world, the year had two faces, one bright and warm, one dark and cold. The turn between them was not gentle. It was a sharp seam, a sudden drop, a cliff you could feel in your lungs. The last sheaves of grain were carried in from the fields. The last carts creaked along wet tracks, and the cattle came down from the high summer pastures, hooves knocking stones, breath rising pale in the thinning light. People listened to that sound and knew that the easy half of the year was folding itself away. If you have ever noticed how a room changes when the sun sets early, you know the feeling. The light becomes thin and silver. Shadows grow longer, and the night feels wide, almost hungry, as if it has more space than it should. That was the mood of this turning, and it was not only weather. To the Gaelic peoples, it was a shift in reality itself. The world swung from the side of life toward the side of death, and the hinge of that swing was Samhain. Tonight we will walk slowly across that hinge. We will start on a hillside where a single great fire is being prepared, while every small hearth is allowed to go dark. We will step down into a limestone cave that legends called a mouth, a place where the earth could open and breathe out strange presences. We will sit at a table where an empty chair waits, and everyone eats in silence, listening for the smallest creak of a floorboard. And we will follow the long road that leads from those quiet rituals to plastic masks, factory-wrapped candy, and bright lawns filled with inflatable ghosts. If this is the kind of story you like to drift into, tap like and subscribe. It is a small motion, and then you can let the rest of the night carry you. Now take a slow breath in and let it out. Let your jaw loosen. Let your shoulders fall. Listen to the soft crack of wood settling. Listen to the hush between sounds. Samhain was a boundary. In the old imagination, boundaries were not just lines. They were places where rules weakened. A shoreline where water meets land. A doorway where inside meets outside. A dusk hour when day is not day anymore and night is not fully night yet. Samhain was like that, a liminal night belonging to neither season, a night that stood outside ordinary time. The land itself taught this way of thinking. Ireland and Scotland were not seen as empty fields and silent forests. They were seen as living terrain. A misty hill had a memory. An old oak had a presence. A bog could hold the body of a forgotten king, preserved in the dark, as if the earth refused to let him fully leave. People walked through such places with respect, because they did not believe humans were masters here. Humans were one small part of a much larger community of beings. Just beyond the veil of ordinary senses, they believed there was another realm. Not a hell of punishment and flame. A parallel world, timeless, often beautiful, and dangerous in the way storms are dangerous. They called it the Otherworld, the Sea Day, the Hollow Hills. It was home to beings known as the Aos Sí, sometimes spoken of as ancestors, sometimes as old gods, sometimes as fairy folk, all at once. They were powerful and unpredictable, and not bound by human ideas of fairness. They were not always cruel, but they were never safe. Most of the year, the border between these worlds was firm. There were rules. You avoided certain mounds at certain hours. You offered respect at springs and trees. You did not speak loudly in places that felt watched. But on Samhain night, the border dissolved. The veil grew thin and porous, and the old stories said that the sea-day mounds could open, spilling a strange light into the dark. When that happened, spirits could walk freely in the mortal world. This was where the dread lived, not in screaming monsters, but in the thought of meeting something that did not care about you. Something ancient, something bright, something cold in its own way. The medieval tale called The Adventure of Nera describes the darkness of Samhain and speaks of demons appearing. That word demon is a later Christian lens, but the feeling underneath is older. It is the fear of an encounter with an alien power, a presence that does not follow human rules. And yet Samhain was not only fear, it was also potential. If the veil was thin, then the dead could return. Ancestors could find their way back to the hearths they once knew. Families could honor them with food and drink. A future could be glimpsed, not because the future was friendly, but because the distance between now and later felt briefly smaller. So people did not simply hide. They prepared. They used their strongest sacred technology, fire. Imagine a district at dusk. One house after another lets its hearth go out. A family watches the last ember shrink, glow, then darken, and the room becomes colder. Smoke smells sharp for a moment, then fades. Across the village, the same thing happens, until the whole place feels as if it is holding its breath. Then people begin to move, cloaks pulled close, feet careful on damp ground, and they gather on a hill where a great bonfire will be lit. They do not light it from an old flame. Later tradition speaks of a need, fire made by friction, born from clean wood, a new beginning. Hands rub and press. Wood squeaks. Smoke rises in a thin thread, and then a small flame appears, delicate at first, then steadier. When the bonfire catches, the light is strong, sparks lifting into the night like tiny orange insects. Faces glow and then vanish as people turn their heads. Cattle shift and stamp, uneasy in the changing air. The bonfire is purification. People and livestock might pass between two fires, as if walking through a doorway of heat to leave sickness and ill fortune behind. The bonfire is also protection, a shield of warmth against whatever is now walking in the dark beyond the ring of light. From that single flame, torches will be carried back to every home, and each hearth will be rekindled, a sign that the community survives together. Around that fire there are offerings. A bowl of food left at a threshold, a cup of drink set aside, not for a child, not for a guest of flesh and blood, but for wandering ancestral presences. Hospitality extended across the boundary of death. And there are masks. Disguise is both play and defense. People cover their faces with straw, with skins, with carved wood, They change their outline. They move in small groups. They let the night see something uncertain. The hope is simple. If a malevolent spirit looks your way, it might not recognize you as human. It might pass on. This is the heart we are going to follow. A sacred night of darkness, made bearable by shared light. A night when the world feels open at the edges. A night that later becomes a holiday of costumes and candy, bright on the surface, and still carrying the old shadow underneath. Stay close to the fire with me. In the next part, we will step deeper into the landscape, to the places where the earth itself was said to open, and we will feel how belief was anchored in stone, water, and bone. The hill where they gathered was not chosen at random. It was a place you could see from many doorways. In the fading light, you could watch neighbors arrive from different paths, each figure a darker shape against the grass, each cloak moving like a slow wing. The ground was damp and soft, and each step made a small sound, a quiet press, a release. Some carried bundles of dry wood. Some carried torches that were not yet lit. Some carried nothing but their own breath and the weight of the coming season. Honestly, I have always found it strange that people think fear makes us hide. Often fear makes us organize. Fear makes us count. Fear makes us gather. On Samhain, the gathering itself was part of the protection. A lone house in a dark field feels small. A circle of households feeding one flame feels larger, like one body with many hands. You can picture the moment when the first spark is coaxed into being. Two pieces of wood rubbing together. A steady rhythm of hands. Not frantic, but determined. A faint scent of warm resin. A thin gray thread of smoke. Someone leans closer, careful not to breathe too hard, careful not to kill the tiny beginning. Then the ember glows. A breath is held. A breath is released. And the ember is placed into tinder, and the tinder takes it, and flame lifts itself up as if it has been waiting. When the bonfire finally rises, it changes the color of everything. Faces become orange and soft. Eyes reflect light. Hair and wool shine briefly. Sparks drift upward, and for a second they look like stars that have fallen and decided to climb back to the sky. The wind pushes smoke sideways, and the smoke carries the smell of peat, of sap, of old wood, of a year that has been burned down to a smaller thing. Near the edge of the light, darkness still waits. It does not vanish. It simply steps back. That is another truth people forget. Light does not erase the night. It makes a small island, and the island is where people tell themselves they will endure. Somewhere in that circle, a child watches the flames with wide eyes. A hand rests on the child's shoulder, steady, warm through cloth. An elder speaks softly, not a lecture, just a reminder. This night is different. This night belongs to neither half of the year. This night is a hinge, and because it is a hinge, it squeaks, it loosens, it lets things slip through. That is why the old stories are full of openings. Mounds that swing wide, doorways under hills, paths that are safe in summer and unsafe tonight. A spring that feels ordinary in daylight and haunted in the dark. Even a simple road between two farms can feel like a threshold when mist rises and the world seems to hold a second breath. In the old imagination, the dead were not only gone, they were near. They were part of the household in a longer sense. So on Samhain, the thought was not that the dead would burst in with noise. It was that they might return quietly, drawn by memory, a familiar presence settling near the hearth, a feeling of being watched with tenderness, a scent that reminds you of someone who is no longer here, a shift in the air that makes you pause mid-motion, spoon held above a bowl, as if you have heard a name. This is why offerings mattered. A little food, a little drink, a sign that the living remember, a sign that the living can share, even when winter threatens to tighten every storehouse and every hand. In a hard season, giving anything away is not careless. It is sacred. And yet, the same thin veil that welcomes ancestors also invites other things. Trickster presences, capricious beings from the hollow hills, the lonely dead who have no hearth to return to. The old stories do not always name them clearly, because naming can feel like an invitation. They simply say, "Be careful. Do not travel alone. Do not call out loudly. Do not trust every light you see in the distance. Do not follow music that seems to come from under the ground." So the masks serve two feelings at once. They are laughter, because laughter keeps fear from hardening into panic. They are camouflage, because you do not want to be chosen. A straw hood makes a person look like an animal. A carved face makes a person look like a spirit. A cloak turned inside out makes a familiar outline unfamiliar. Small inversions, small confusions. The night is already strange, so people make themselves strange too. All of this is the seed of modern Halloween, but the seed is not sweet. It is not sugar. It is not plastic. It is the steady human act of looking into winter and deciding to meet it together, with fire, with food, with silence, with disguise, with careful respect for what cannot be controlled. Keep that in mind as you relax. The fire beside us is small compared to a hill bonfire, but it works the same way. It gathers the mind into one place. It makes a circle. It lets the darkness stay outside the circle without pretending the darkness is gone. Take another slow breath. Feel the warmth in your hands. Feel how your thoughts can loosen like cloth. In the next part, we will follow the belief into specific places, into the soil itself, into caves and ancient mounds, and we will see how the doorway idea was anchored to stone, water, and bone, with a few details that are debated, and a few that still feel chilling even when we speak of them gently. The embers will guide us forward, and the old hill shadows will follow at a respectful distance. The firelight is steady, and the night outside feels patient. Now we leave the hill for a while, and we walk into the land itself. Because Samhain was not only an idea in the mind, it was pinned to places, to names spoken low, to hollows in the earth where cold air seems to breathe outward. In the old stories, the border between worlds was not floating in the sky. It was in the ground. It was in mounds that rose like sleeping backs beneath grass. It was in caves where water dripped and sound returned to you, softened and altered. It was in ancient tombs where the dead were gathered in stone chambers and the living could feel their presence without seeing them. Some medieval texts try to describe the atmosphere of Samhain with a sentence that sticks. They say the darkness was great on that night, and beings would appear. Later writers used the word demon. That word is not quite right for the older Gaelic view, but the fear it carries is familiar. It is the fear of stepping too close to a doorway you cannot control. One of the most important landscapes in these traditions is Rathcrogan, in what is now County Roscommon. For centuries it was remembered as a royal and ritual center where Samhain feasting and ceremony gathered people from a wide area. When you imagine it, do not picture a single shining palace. Picture a complex of earthworks, ridges and rings, paths worn by many feet, grass hiding older lines of digging. Picture mist moving across low ground. Picture a wind that carries the smell of wet soil and crushed plants. A place like that can feel ordinary in daylight, and then feel different at dusk, as if it has its own awareness. Deep within this landscape lies a feature that turns the stories darker. A limestone fissure and cave known as Owainagat, the Cave of the Cats. Local legend held that it was a literal entrance to the Otherworld. On Samhain night, they said, monstrous beings could emerge from that mouth and bring chaos to the surrounding countryside. Those words can sound dramatic when printed on a page. In a real place, standing near a cave mouth that exhales cold air, drama is not needed. The body understands. The skin tightens. The ears search the dark for movement. If you were standing here with me, we would approach slowly. The ground would change underfoot, from grass to stones, from stones to damp soil. The opening would be low and dark. Water would bead on the rock. The air coming out would feel colder than the night air, a steady breath from inside the hill. Our voices would sound different, swallowed quickly, as if the cave prefers silence. A small candle flame would lean and flutter, and the smell of wax would mix with the mineral scent of stone. Archaeology has found something inside this mouth that gives the legends a chill of realism. Excavations revealed piles of animal bones, including cats and badgers, left just inside the cave. It looks like offerings. Not proof of monsters, not proof of a gate in a literal sense, but proof that people treated this place as dangerous and powerful. They carried bodies of animals here. They placed them in the dark. They did it for a reason. When you think about that, it becomes easier to understand how a story forms. A real practice leaves a trace. A trace feeds a belief. A belief teaches the next generation how to feel. Samhain also reaches deeper into time than the Iron Age. At Tara, the legendary seat of the High Kings of Ireland, there is a passage tomb known as the Mound of the Hostages. It is about 5,000 years old. Inside, a narrow passage leads to a chamber that once held cremated remains of hundreds of people. There is a detail that has captured many imaginations. The passage is aligned so that on the morning of Samhain, the first rays of the rising sun can penetrate the darkness and illuminate the chamber. It is a powerful image, the first light of the winter half of the year reaching into a house of the dead. A brief reunion of living season and long-departed bones. A beam of light crawling along stone, touching dust that has not been touched by hands for centuries. The mind wants to believe the builders intended it. Some experts caution that such alignments may not have been planned, that chance and later interpretation can create meaning. We cannot be sure. Still, even uncertainty does not erase the feeling. Whether intended or accidental, the image fits Samhain too well to forget. Imagine that dawn. The grass outside is wet with frost. The air is sharp. Breath clouds for a moment and then dissolves. A few people stand quietly, not speaking. They do not want to disturb the moment. Inside the passage, the darkness is complete at first, thick as cloth. Then a thin line of light appears, faint, almost unsure. It grows stronger. It moves slowly. It finds the chamber, and for a brief time the interior is touched by gold. Dust motes turn in that beam like tiny drifting seeds. Then the angle shifts, the light withdraws, and the chamber returns to its old hush. These sights show how the Gaelic sense of the Otherworld was anchored to the land, not as a fantasy that floats away, but as a geography of thresholds. A cave mouth, a mound door, a passage aligned to a seasonal moment. When you live with that mindset, Samhain is not just a date. It is a night when places themselves become more active, more open, more sensitive. Now, faced with this closeness, the people did something that is both spiritual and practical. They used fire. Fire is warmth, and warmth is survival. Fire is also a signal, and a signal is comfort. When the night feels full of presences, a flame gives the eyes something steady to hold. The central ritual of Samhain was the lighting of a great bonfire. Later, folklorists like Geoffrey Keating describe it as a druidic rite of significance. We should be gentle with certainty here. Details of druid practice are difficult to pin down, and later writers can project. Still, the pattern of the bonfire is strong in tradition. Hearths were extinguished. A single community fire was kindled, sometimes described as made from friction, from virgin wood. Then families carried flame back home to relight their own hearth, taking part of the communal protection into private space. When you picture this, slow it down. A torch lifted, a hand shielding the flame from wind, a cloak turned to block gusts, footsteps careful on uneven ground. The torch crackles softly. Sparks drift and go out before they land. Someone glances toward the dark beyond the path, not because they see a monster, but because they feel watched by possibility. The torch becomes a small, moving island of light, and the person carrying it becomes a bridge between the great hill fire and the quiet hearth. At home, the hearth waits like a mouth of ash. The room is colder than before. The family gathers close. A child shivers. The torch is lowered. A piece of tinder catches. The first new flame licks upward. It is small, and it changes everything. The room becomes a little safer, not because the world outside is safe, but because the family has reclaimed its center. This is where Samhain begins to feel less like panic and more like order. The other world may be near, but the living respond with ritual. They do not deny fear. They give fear a shape, and then they give themselves a shape too. A circle around fire. A rule of hospitality. A rule of caution. a rule of gathering. In some traditions, people and livestock walked between two fires to be cleansed of sickness and ill fortune from the past year. This is not modern medicine. It is symbolic, and it is also a way of marking the transition. The old year is burned away. The new dark season begins with purification. Even if the spirits are close, the community is closer. As you listen, you can let these images settle. Stone and bone, water drip in a cave, a beam of sun entering a tomb, a torch moving along a path, a hearth returning to life. All of them are small actions, but they carry the weight of deep time, and they lead directly into the next layer of the story, the human layer of law and feast, kings and tribute, and the quiet household rituals that kept the soul of the night alive. The tale of Nera places a man out in the darkness on Samhain, sent from a king's hall to perform a task that feels simple and becomes unsettling. A body hangs, the story says, and Nera is told to put a withe around it. The detail is not meant to be gory. It is meant to be wrong in the air, a reminder that this night belongs to the dead. Then the dead speaks. Then the dead asks for water, and the night becomes a maze of thresholds. The story is medieval in its surviving form, and later Christian language can cling to it. Still, you can feel the older core, the sense that Samhain is the moment when what should stay separate can touch. I like to imagine the king's hall in the background, not as a shining castle, but as a timber building warmed by peat smoke, with benches worn smooth by years of bodies shifting on them. A cauldron hangs over the fire. Meat and grain simmer. Ale is poured. Outside, the wind scrapes along the walls. Inside, people speak in low voices because they know the night outside is listening. Even the laughter is careful, not because joy is forbidden, but because joy feels brighter when it is wrapped in caution. Rathcrogan would have held gatherings like this, feasts and ceremony that brought chieftains and their people together at the hinge of the year. You can picture riders arriving, mud on their boots, reins wet from drizzle, horses shaking water from their manes. You can picture wagons creaking under the weight of food, sacks of grain, barrels of drink. You can picture dogs weaving between legs, noses down, reading the ground. Every arrival adds to the sense of a village becoming a crowd becoming a single body. Then, at the edge of that human body, the land offers its own mouth. Ove Nagat. A fissure does not look like a palace. It looks like absence. It looks like a place where the earth forgot to close. That is part of why it is frightening. A mound is a closed thing. A cave is open. A cave invites the imagination to walk in. If you stand near the cave, you can hear water. Not a stream, but individual drops. Each drop strikes rock. Then the sound expands. Then it fades. It is like a slow pulse. The air is damp. The rock is slick in places. Lichen clings to surfaces near the mouth, green and gray, soft under a finger, then suddenly rough where stone is bare. A candle held too close to the opening will flutter, as if the cave is breathing in and out. Now think of the bones again. Cats and badgers. These are not the bones of a feast thrown carelessly. They are placed where the cave begins. They read like a message left for something unseen. Appease, distract, feed, or simply acknowledge. We cannot know the exact intention. We can know that intention existed. A person chose a path at night, chose to carry something heavy, chose to enter the dark enough to leave an offering, then chose to turn back. That act alone tells you how real the Otherworld felt. At Terra, the feeling is different. The mound of the hostages is not a mouth. It is a corridor. It teaches patience. The passage is narrow. The ceiling presses low. The stones are cold. If you step inside, your own footfall changes, as if the sound belongs to someone else. You smell earth. You smell old stone. And you feel, even without seeing anything, that many bodies were brought here, reduced to ash, and kept within the chamber. The living built a house for the dead, then kept returning to it in thought, generation after generation. The Samhain sunrise alignment, whether planned or coincidental, turns that house into a stage. Light enters, and for a moment it feels like permission, as if winter itself, which can seem cruel, offers a thin gift, a narrow beam, a reminder that darkness is not the only thing that will return. Then the beam withdraws, and the chamber keeps its secrets. These places help explain why fire mattered so much. If the land could open, then the living needed a counterbalance. Fire is the opposite of a cave mouth. It is a deliberate opening made by human hands. It is a controlled doorway. It is a place where the invisible can be greeted on your terms. Even the act of extinguishing the hearth makes sense in this frame. When every house goes dark, the community admits vulnerability. Then the shared bonfire offers a single answer. We will meet the night together. Taking a torch from that fire and carrying it home is like carrying a piece of the group into solitude, a small assurance that even behind your own door, you are not alone. Let that be the feeling that settles in your chest. Not fear, not denial, a quiet readiness. In the next part, we will stay with this closeness between worlds, and we will move from the sacred sites into the human home, where silence at the table, disguises on the road, and simple games with apples and water become ways of navigating a night that feels alive. Stay close to the warmth a little longer. The night can be wide, but the fire makes a small, safe center. On Samhain, the first great ritual often began with something that felt almost too simple: the extinguishing of the hearth. A hearth was not only a place to cook, it was the heart of a home, a steady orange eye that watched the family breathe through the year. So when the flame was allowed to die, it was like closing that eye. The room cooled. Shadows gathered on the rafters. The familiar smell of smoke thinned and then vanished. You could hear the smallest sounds again: the faint click of a spoon on wood, the soft shuffle of a foot on packed earth, the wind brushing the thatch, a distant dog giving one low bark and then stopping as if it remembered the night. In many districts, the custom was that every hearth in the area would be put out until the whole community sat in a shared darkness. Not a frightening darkness, more like a deliberate pause, the world holding its breath at the seam of the year. If you were standing there, you would see doors closing, shutters pulled in, A last glance at the fading ember, then hands turning away as if to say, "We will not cling to the old season. We will let it pass." It is a strange thing to choose darkness when you already fear the dark. But honestly, I have always found it strange how often humans do this when a change is coming. We turn off the lamp before we light a candle. We close the old book before we open another. The small ritual gives the mind a handle. It says, "This is not random. This is the way we cross." Inside a cottage, the family might stand still for a moment. A mother lays a palm on the mantelstone, feeling the last warmth fade. A child leans closer to see if any red remains under the ash. An older voice says, "No, we let it go. We do not borrow heat from yesterday." The child shivers, and a cloak is pulled tighter. Wool brushing skin. A pot lid is set down, and the sound seems louder in the sudden quiet. Outside, the wind turns the corner of the house and presses a cold hand against the door. Then people moved out into the night, not as scattered individuals, but as a slow stream, each family joining another. Cloaks brushed against legs. Wool caught a little mist and grew heavier. Boots pressed into wet ground and released with a quiet sound. A soft pull, then a step forward. Hands carried small things. Bundles of dry wood wrapped in cord. A clay cup turned upside down and tied to a strap. A basket with oats. A wedge of bread. A bit of salted meat. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to share. Just enough to honor what could not be seen. As they walked, the path itself felt different. In summer, a path is only a path. Tonight, it was a border. Hedges looked taller. The ditch beside the track held water that reflected no stars, only black. A thin fog sat low in hollows, and when you stepped through it, your boots darkened with moisture. People spoke less, not because they were ordered to, but because the night asked for quiet. A cough was muffled into a sleeve. A laugh, if it appeared, came out small and careful, then vanished. The place of gathering was often a hill or a high open ground. Somewhere the bonfire could be seen from many doorways. From far away you might first notice a low glow, then the sound of voices, then the scent of peat and pine rising into the dark. A ring of people forms before the ring of flame. Bodies find their places by habit, families close together, neighbors nodding with a kind of tired kindness. Someone sets down a bundle of wood. Someone passes a cup. Someone rubs hands together, palms rasping softly, because cold lives in the fingertips first. The fire itself was sometimes described as a need fire, kindled new, born from friction, from clean wood, from patient hands that kept rubbing until smoke became ember, and ember became flame. We cannot be certain of every detail of Druid practice. Later, writers loved to paint the past with clear colors. Still, the image holds. A community refusing to borrow an old flame, choosing instead to make a new one at the start of the dark season. Imagine the making of it. A man kneels and sets two pieces of wood into place. His knees sink a little into damp grass. His breath shows in front of his face. He adjusts his grip, fingers stiff with cold. Then begins a steady motion. Not fast, steady. Wood squeaks. The sound is small, but everyone hears it. Someone leans closer, then leans back, giving space, as if the act needs room to happen. A thin thread of smoke rises, then breaks, then rises again. A child wants to clap, but a hand rests on the child's wrist, gentle, and the child watches instead, eyes wide, quiet learning. The smoke thickens. A scent of warm resin appears. Then, almost shyly, a small ember glows. A breath is held. A breath is released. The ember is placed into dry tinder, and the tinder accepts it, and a small flame lifts itself up. Now, the moment when the bonfire takes. A bundle of tinder catches. Then a thicker branch begins to glow. Then the whole stack begins to breathe flame. Sparks lift and drift and vanish before they land. The light touches faces, then lets them go again as people turn. It makes a circle on the grass, and outside that circle the night waits, quiet and patient, like water around a stone. This fire was purification. In some traditions, people and livestock walked between two fires, passing through heat and smoke as if passing through a doorway that could scrape away sickness and ill fortune. Even if you do not believe the smoke could carry disease away, you can feel why it mattered. It marked the turning. It gave the body a sense of crossing. It said, "The old year has left its dust on us. Now we step forward cleaner, together." Picture the animals. Cattle shift and snort, eyes reflecting flame. A handler murmurs, low and steady, the way you speak to something strong that you need to trust you. Hooves tap the ground. A rope creaks. The animal steps forward, then hesitates as heat brushes its face. The handler moves with it, slow, calm, not forcing. Then the animal passes between the fires, smoke curling around its flanks. For a moment, the whole scene feels like a doorway, living bodies moving through light, then out again into dark. The fire was also protection. The old stories said the Otherworld was close tonight. The seed hay mounds could open. Spirits could move in the dark beyond the fields. So the bonfire was a shield, not a wall, but a bright statement. We are here. We are awake. We are not alone. The heat on your hands would be real. The light in your eyes would be real. And that reality could steady the mind when imagination began to drift toward hidden doors in the hills. Around the bonfire, people kept small customs. Some tossed a pinch of grain into the flames, watching it flare for an instant. Some held a cup up, not drinking yet, letting the warmth touch the rim. Some stood with eyes closed for a heartbeat, listening, hearing the fire crack, hearing wind move beyond, hearing the murmur of others, and beneath all that, hearing the quiet question the night always carries: who is near? On Samhain, hospitality stretched beyond the living. Offerings were left for ancestral guests, food and drink placed where the unseen might find them, at a doorstep, near a window, by the hearth. Some households set aside the best bite, not as waste, but as respect. The dead were remembered as kin, not strangers. The act was gentle, a way of saying, If you can cross tonight, you are welcome to sit near us. Sometimes the offering was made before the bonfire. A woman unwraps a cloth. Inside is bread, still smelling faintly of smoke from the oven. She breaks a piece and holds it for a moment, not eating, just holding, as if listening to a memory. Then she sets it down on a flat stone near the edge of light, where darkness begins. No announcement, no flourish, just a small placement. Then she steps back into the circle, hands empty, face calm. Other offerings were made later. At home, a cup of drink set on the sill, a bowl placed near the hearth once it is relit, a door left unlatched for a short time, then closed again, because even welcome must have a boundary. The night is open, but the home still needs a frame. Still, not every presence was welcomed with open arms. The same thin veil that might bring a beloved ancestor could also bring trickster spirits, capricious fair folk, the lonely dead with no hearth to return to. So people used another tool, disguise. This is where the making begins, and it can be slow, almost tender. In a byre or a shed, a young man ties straw into a rough hood. His fingers work the knots by feel. The straw pricks his skin, but he keeps going. A girl helps by holding the bundle steady, her breath making a small cloud in the cold air. Someone else carves a piece of wood with a simple knife. The blade scrapes. Tiny curls fall to the ground. The smell of fresh cut wood rises, clean and sharp. A mask takes shape, not beautiful, not meant for beauty, meant for confusion. Eyes become holes. A mouth becomes a line. The face becomes not a face. Cloth is pulled over hair. Animal skin is draped over shoulders. Some invert clothing, turning a cloak inside out. Some swap garments, not as a joke, but as a way to break the ordinary pattern the night might recognize. If the world is strange, they make themselves strange too. Camouflage and theater, both at once. When the group finally moves, it moves like a small weather front. Footsteps on the path, a rustle of straw, a low hum of voices. They approach a house, and someone knocks. Inside, the family listens, and the sound is not only a knock, it is a test, the night asking for exchange. The door opens a little. The smell of hearth smoke slips out into cold air. The masked figures offer a song, a poem, a small performance, and receive food, drink, or coins in return. The family gives, not only because it is expected, but because giving is part of safety, part of belonging. The door closes. The group moves on. The path holds their footprints for a while. Then darkness swallows them. You can feel the seed of later customs here, going door to door, costumi, exchange. But in the older night, the exchange was not sugar. It was a village binding itself together. It was a village choosing to meet a dangerous night with shared rules. From the great bonfire, a torch was taken to each home. This part always moves me, because it is both communal and intimate. A person steps away from the crowd with a flame cupped in a lantern, or on a stick of resinous wood. They hold it close, shielding it from wind with a sleeve. The path back is darker than it was on the way out, because now the eyes have been filled with firelight, and the world beyond feels deeper. Footsteps slow. A branch snaps somewhere, and for a moment, the heart listens. Then the torch crackles gently, and the traveler breathes again. Steady. The lantern light shakes as the hand moves. Shadows jump on hedge leaves. A puddle catches the flame and turns it into a broken ribbon of orange. The traveler pauses once, not because they are lost, but because they sense the night behind them. Then they continue. One step, then another, careful with the small fire that must not die. At the threshold of the home, the old hearth waits, cold and gray. The family gathers close, shoulders touching, breath quiet. The flame is lowered to tinder. The first curl of smoke rises. Then a small tongue of fire appears. It is tiny, and it changes everything. Warmth returns. Light returns. The home opens its eye again. When that new hearth flame rises, the room feels a little more certain. A pot is set back onto the hook. A cup is filled. A child relaxes into the corner of a blanket. An elder watches the flame with a calm face, because the elder has seen many winters. The elder knows that the light will not last forever, but it will last for this night. And that is enough. When you look at modern Halloween, you can still see the outline of Samhain. Costumes, doorstep visits, carved faces lit from within. But the older meaning was protection, unity, and the quiet decision to cross into winter without breaking apart. As we move forward, we will see how the same night also held the business of kings and chieftains, the ordering of society at the moment when winter demanded planning. The bonfire on the hill was not only magic, it was also a signal. The year has turned. Now we gather. Now we count. Now we prepare. Let the image settle. Sparks rising. Smoke thinning into the stars. A masked figure turning down a lane. A torch carried carefully home. These are small motions, but they are the motions that hold a community together when the season turns. And as the embers sink, a different kind of gathering begins to form, not around spirits, but around law, tribute, and the hard arithmetic of winter. The hill fire could feel like the center of the world, but Samhain was also a hinge for ordinary survival, and the people knew it in their bones. Winter was not a mood. Winter was a plan. It was a ledger of grain and wood and animals, and a set of promises that had to hold. Because if the promises broke, the cold would not forgive. Samhain fell at the logical end of the pastoral year. The growing season was finished. The last of the grain had been gathered, and the cattle, the great measure of wealth in Gaelic society, were driven down from summer grazing lands in the hills. You can picture that drive. A long line of dark bodies moving through mist. Bells swinging. Hooves striking stone. Handlers calling softly, keeping the herd together like a slow river. At the edge of the village, gates open, then close, and the animals settle into pens, breath steaming, warmth rising from their flanks into cold air. With the herds home, a grim calculation arrived. Not every animal could be fed through the long, lean months. Hay was limited. Stored fodder was precious. So a choice had to be made. The older sources speak of a great slaughter that took place around this time, creating a sudden abundance of fresh meat for a final feast before hardship tightened its grip. We do not need to linger on the act. It is enough to feel the mood, the quiet seriousness of it, the sense that life and death were not abstractions on this night, but part of the winter math. A knife is sharpened. A wooden trough is washed. A fire is stoked. Hands work with practiced care, because care is a kind of respect. The feast that followed was not only indulgence, it was preservation. It was the community taking the surplus of the year and turning it into warmth in the belly, and into loyalty in the heart. Grain that could not be stored forever was brewed into ale and mead. Barrels were opened. Cups moved from hand to hand. The smell of cooked meat and smoke filled halls and cottages. Outside, the wind moved across fields that had already given their last gift. Inside, people ate, because eating together is one of the oldest ways to say, "We are still here." This was also the end of the season of expansion and warfare. In many traditions, a peace was declared for Samhain, a time when feuds, raids, and legal disputes were set aside. The idea was practical. If winter was coming, families needed to gather, to share labor, to settle accounts, to prepare shelter, to make sure no one was trapped alone on a road because of a blood debt. A piece of peace, enforced by custom, allowed the scattered parts of society to come together safely. I like to imagine the way that peace would feel. A man who has carried anger all summer sets it down, not because the anger is gone, but because the season demands cooperation. Two rivals stand in the same yard and nod once. A weapon is hung on a peg and left there. A young warrior touches the hilt out of habit, then lets the hand fall away. The air feels tense for a moment, then slowly loosens, because everyone wants the same thing: to survive the winter. This is why Samhain became the perfect moment for great assemblies. The Onach, gatherings where social, economic, and political life was put on display. The medieval Irish sagas paint vivid pictures of these meetings, full of feasting, games, negotiations, and the careful performance of hierarchy. Some details are shaped by storytelling, and we should hold them with gentle caution, but the broad pattern is clear. Samhain was a time when people gathered and law became visible. Picture a great hall, not a stone castle, but timber and thatch, smoke blackening the roof beams, rushes on the floor, benches worn smooth by years of shifting bodies. At the center, a fire burns, not as high as the hill bonfire, but steady. Light pools on faces. Cups gleam. A harp string is plucked softly, then stops. Outside, the night presses close, but inside, order is being spoken into place. In one saga, King Conchobar is said to host a Samhain feast for his nobles at his royal seat. The tale boasts of enormous quantities of ale. Vats upon vats, a detail that is less about exact counting and more about meaning. The king proves generosity. The king proves capacity. The king shows that he can feed many mouths at the hinge of the year, and in doing so, he buys loyalty. A warrior who eats at a king's table feels bound, not only by gratitude, but by the simple fact that the king kept him warm and full when winter began. These assemblies are described as lasting for a full week, 3 days before Samhain, the day itself, and 3 days after. Whether every gathering followed that exact rhythm is hard to know, but the idea of an extended liminal period fits the mood. Time stretches. Normal work pauses. People travel, arriving with mud on their boots and news in their mouths. They play games. They compete. They negotiate marriages. They listen to judgments. They watch the seating order, because where a person sits can tell the whole story of a hierarchy without a single word spoken. Beneath the revelry, accounts were settled. Tribute was paid. The old legal codes known as Brehon law describe obligations between tenant farmers and chieftains. Offerings due each year, often in livestock. One specific phrase appears in later legal tradition: the pig of Samhain, a customary tribute that marked the season. Again, the exact form could vary by region and time, but the image is strong. A pig led by a rope, the rope held by a farmer with a tense jaw. The farmer brings wealth produced from his land and labor, and sets it into the hands of the Lord, who claims to protect the territory. It is not a gentle act, but it is a structured one. It reaffirms the bonds of obligation that keep society from dissolving into isolated households. You can feel the quiet weight of that moment. The farmer stands before the chieftain. The chieftain sits higher. The hall is warm. Smoke drifts. A scribe might note the transaction in some form, or a witness might be appointed, or a memory might be relied on, because memory was also a record. The pig squeals once, then queets. A hand pats its side, a nervous, soothing gesture. Then the rope changes hands. The farmer exhales. The chieftain nods. The transaction is complete. Winter has begun, and the social map has been redrawn for another year. The ultimate expression of this ordering is the legendary Feast of Tara. According to some texts, every 7th Samhain, the High King of Ireland would convene a great assembly at Tara, far more than a feast, a supreme legislative and judicial event. New laws proclaimed, old ones remade, peace enforced, banishment threatened for those who broke it. The historical reality of such a grand national assembly is debated by scholars. Some argue that later writers projected an idealized national unity backward. Others see echoes of real regional gatherings that grew in legend. We cannot be sure. Still, the legend itself reveals the Gaelic imagination. It places the power of law at the hinge of the year. It says, winter is coming, so the people must bind themselves with words as well as with fire. If you imagine Tara on Samhain, picture a broad hill, wind moving across grass, the scent of damp earth. A crowd gathers. Cloaks ripple. Horses stamp. A line of chiefs and their followers approaches, each group carrying its own pride. In the center, a space is cleared. Voices rise, not in panic, but in formal speech. A law is declared. The crowd listens. Silence spreads outward like a ripple on water. Then the silence breaks into murmurs, and people look to each other, measuring what has changed. In that moment, society is not only lived, it is performed, made visible, made real. This is one reason Samhain feels so complete as a festival. It looks in two directions at once, toward the spirits and the dead, toward fear and mystery, and toward the living, toward cattle and grain, toward tribute and peace. The Otherworld may have been open for business, as the stories say, but so was the court of man. Both had their rules. Both demanded respect. Both could punish those who ignored them. When you hold these two halves together, the later transformation into Halloween becomes easier to understand. A night of costume and doorstep exchange did not begin as a joke. It began as a set of tools for survival, spiritual and social, designed to carry a community across a dangerous threshold. Let us slow down and rest inside the hall again. Imagine the sound of a cup set down on wood. Imagine the low hum of voices. Imagine a game beginning in one corner, laughter rising, then settling. Imagine a storyteller speaking of heroes and otherworld gates, while nearby, a chieftain speaks quietly with a rival and decides to postpone a feud until spring. These are small decisions, but they shape the year. Outside, the bonfire still burns on the hill, seen through the door when it opens. Sparks lift into the dark. A gust pushes smoke sideways. For a moment, the smell of peat and ash enters the hall. Then the door closes, and the warmth returns. That door is like the year itself, opening and closing, letting winter breathe in, then shutting against it. In the days around Samhain, people also needed to know who would stand with whom when the hard months came. A king's generosity was not only display, it was insurance. A warrior who ate at the feast might be expected to defend the cattle in winter raids. A farmer who paid tribute might expect protection on the road. A guest who slept under the same roof might carry news and promises back to a distant valley. All of this was woven together at Samhain, because the dark season demanded a tighter weave. If you listen closely, you can hear how this social rhythm echoes in later customs. Door-to-door visits, exchange for food, a community agreement that mischief and chaos must be contained inside a frame. That frame was once law and custom. Later it would become polite rules and candy. But the shape remains, and when the assembly ends, it ends slowly. Guests pack their cloaks. Straps are tightened. Horses are fed. A last cup is drained. A last handshake is given. A last warning is whispered. Travel carefully. The night is still strange. Then people step out into cold air, and the hall behind them exhales smoke through the roof, as if it too is alive. The road takes them back to their own valleys, their own hearths, their own small worlds, carrying with them new promises and old grudges held at bay. And in that return, the festival changes tone. The public ordering fades. The private listening begins. The same night that held law now holds silence. The same season that demanded tribute now invites memory. That is where we will go next, back into the cottage, where an empty place at the table can be more powerful than any king's speech, and where a carved face, lit from within, can guard a doorway with nothing but a small coal and a steady stare. Consider the brewing itself. A wooden vat stands near the warmth, staves darkened by years of use. Hot water is poured in, steam rising, carrying the scent of grain. A paddle moves slowly, circles within circles, and the liquid thickens. Someone tastes with the tip of a spoon, then nods, then stirs again. Time is folded into the drink, and the drink will later fold courage into tired bodies. Mead is poured from a jug. It catches firelight and glows. A hand wipes a spill with a sleeve. A dog noses at the rushes on the floor and is shooed away with a gentle foot. Nothing dramatic, just the quiet machinery of a feast. Now think of the peace that is proclaimed. It might not be written on parchment. It might be spoken aloud, carried by witnesses, enforced by shame and by the threat of retaliation later. A herald steps forward. His voice is strong, but measured. He says that for this sacred period, roads are to be safe, disputes are to be held back, weapons are to sleep. People listen, and you can feel the mixture of relief and suspicion. A feud does not disappear because a man says peace. Still, the words matter. Words can build a bridge that lasts long enough to cross a dangerous season. Games fill the space between speeches. A contest of strength. A throwing game. A riddle spoken and answered. A child weaving between adults, holding a crust of bread. A grandmother tapping ash from a pipe into the fire, watching it flare and then settle. These small scenes are how a community convinces itself that winter is not only hardship. Winter is also belonging. When tribute is paid, it is not only animals. Trezin, it can be wool, butter, grain, labor promised, days of service. A basket is set down. A lid is lifted. The contents are checked. A nod is given. A mark is remembered. Even in an oral culture, accounting exists. It lives in repetition and witnesses, and in the way people remember who honored obligations and who tried to slip away. Samhain is the annual tightening of those memories. In the legend of Tara, the threat of banishment carries a cold edge. To be cast out at the beginning of winter is not a mild punishment. It means no shared fire, no shared storehouse, no protection when roads are dangerous. Whether or not such absolute authority was ever enforced as the legend claims, the idea reveals what people feared. Not only spirits, not only hunger, isolation. A person alone in winter is a person already half lost. So the assembly is not just theater. It is a cure for isolation. It gathers scattered households into one listening body. It turns law into a shared rhythm. It turns the year into a story everyone agrees to follow, at least until spring returns and the old tensions rise again. When the week ends, it ends slowly. Guests pack their cloaks. Straps are tightened. Horses are fed. A last cup is drained. A last handshake is given. A last warning is whispered. Travel carefully. The night is still strange. Then people step out into cold air, and the hall behind them exhales smoke through the roof, as if it too is alive. The road takes them back to their own valleys, their own hearths, their own small worlds, carrying with them new promises and old grudges held at bay. And in that return, the festival changes tone. The public ordering fades. The private listening begins. The same night that held law now holds silence. The same season that demanded tribute now invites memory. That is where we will go next, back into the cottage, where an empty place at the table can be more powerful than any king's speech, and where a carved face lit from within can guard a doorway with nothing but a small coal and a steady stare. The walk back from the king's hall is slower than the walk toward it. Night has settled deeper. The path holds puddles that reflect only firelight from distant hills. Boots press into damp earth and lift again, leaving prints that fill with water. Somewhere a stream moves under a small bridge, and the sound is steady, like a quiet breath. Samhain could be loud in the great gatherings, but its truest soul lived in small rooms, in cottages where turf smoke clung to rafters, in low houses where the hearth was the center of warmth and the center of memory. This is where the night became intimate. This is where the veil felt close enough to touch without ever being seen. When the family returned home, they carried a piece of the hill fire with them. A torch, tip glowing. A coal cradled in ash inside a small clay pot. Hands shielding the ember from wind. The doorway opened and a cold draft slipped in. Then the door closed, and the room became a pocket of dim air and waiting. The hearth was ready. Gray ash, blackened stones, a few dry sticks, tinder, saved for this moment. A mother knelt and set the ember down with care. She leaned close, but not too close. She breathed slowly, so the ember would not be startled by wind from her mouth. A child watched with wide eyes and held very still. A thin ribbon of smoke rose. Then a small flame lifted. Then the flame found the wood and grew steadier. The house warmed again. The darkness outside stayed outside. Then came the meal. Not the grand feast of nobles and vats of ale. A simpler meal. Bread, broth, a little meat if there was any to spare, and a cup of drink warmed near the fire. What made this meal different was the chair. An empty chair was drawn up to the table. A plate was set before it. The best bite was placed on that plate, not the scrap, not the last crust, the best. A cup was filled and set beside it. No one laughed at this. No one treated it as play. This place was for the dead. People called this the dumb supper. Dumb here meant silent, and silence was the rule. The family ate without speaking. The only sounds were small and close. A spoon touching wood, a swallow, a breath, a log settling in the hearth, a faint crack as heat shifted in a stone. Outside, the wind moved along the wall and then drifted away. Inside, the family listened. They listened for a creak of the floorboard that did not belong to any living foot. They listened for a soft change in the air, as if a door had opened in a place no one could see. They listened for the feeling of being joined, not by something hungry, by someone remembered. You know that feeling when you think of a loved one and the room seems to hold their shape for a moment. Not a ghost you can point to, just a warmth in memory, a pressure behind the eyes, a scent that feels like a season long gone. Samhain invited that feeling and made it ritual. It said the family was not only the living, it was a line stretching backward into deep time. After the meal, the plate on the empty chair was left for a while. Sometimes the door was unlatched for a short time. Not wide open, just not locked. A polite gesture, a quiet welcome. Then later the door was closed again, because even welcome needs a boundary. Outside the cottage, the night was still uncertain. The stories said the mounds were open. The other world was close. Ancestors could return, but so could trickster beings. Capricious, fair folk. The lonely dead who had no hearth to find. The night was full of possible meetings. So people used another kind of protection. They disguised themselves. In a shed, a young man tied straw into a rough cloak. The straw scratched his wrists. He kept tying. In a corner, a friend carved a wooden mask. The knife scraped. Pale curls fell. The wood smelled clean. Eye holes were made. A mouth line was cut. The face became strange. Others draped animal skins over shoulders. Some turned clothing inside out. Some swapped garments. The point was not beauty. The point was confusion. If the night was watching, they did not want the night to know them. They wanted to look like one of the strange things that belonged to Samhain. Not a human with a human name. Just another moving shape. Then the group went out. Feet on the lane. A rustle of straw. A low hum of voices. They moved from house to house. At each door they offered something. A song. A rhyme. A short performance. The householder gave an offering in return. A piece of bread. A bit of meat. A cup of ale. A coin. The exchange bound the village together. It also paid the night a kind of toll. The disguised visitors were not only hiding from spirits, they were also acting out the loosened rules of a liminal time. A night of licensed misrule. A night when ordinary order could tilt without breaking. People could laugh and still feel protected. People could play at being other and still return home before the last embers cooled. Samhain was also the night when many tried to glimpse the future. When the veil was thin, the future felt closer, like a hill seen through mist, not clear, but nearer than usual. So they used small games, half entertainment, half serious magic. Apples were central. Apples were linked in Gaelic tradition to the other world, to youth that does not wither, to a sweetness that does not belong to winter. A tub of water was set out. Apples floated, pale in the firelight. Young men and women took turns trying to catch an apple with their teeth. Hands behind backs, faces close to cold water. Breath held, water rippling, laughter muffled into sleeves. The first to succeed was said to be the first to marry in the coming year. It was a game. It was also a way to make the unknown feel smaller. Another apple ritual was quieter. A young woman peeled an apple in one long strip. She tried not to break it. The peel fell in a thin ribbon. She swung it around her head and let it drop to the floor. The shape it made was read as the initial of the future husband. It might be true. It might be wishful. It might be random. But the act itself was soothing. A small pattern laid over uncertainty. Nuts were used too. Hazelnuts carried the idea of wisdom. A young couple placed 2 nuts on the hearth. They watched. If the nuts burned steadily together, it meant a steady union. If they jumped apart and hissed, it meant quarrel. Again, a game. Again, a way to give shape to fear. Winter was coming. Life was hard. Love could be hard too. So a small omen in flame felt like guidance. As the night wore on, one more protective measure took its place. A face in the window. A glowing watcher at the threshold. In Ireland and Scotland, the first lanterns were not pumpkins. They were turnips. Hard, pale turnips with dense flesh. People carved them with knives that scraped and struggled. They cut grotesque faces. Hollow eyes. A jagged mouth. Then they placed a coal or a candle stump inside. The light made the face glow. Not cheerful. Not friendly. It was meant to be a threat to whatever might come close. A ward. A mirror held up to the other world. Much later, a tale grew around a trickster named Stingy Jack, explaining the lantern as his punishment. That story came after. The older purpose was simpler. Keep the darkness at bay for one more night. Keep the doorway guarded. Let the light inside the carved face do the staring for you. Now, imagine a lane with those lanterns. A few set on sills. One near a byre door. One at the edge of a path. The wind makes the candle tremble. Shadows on the carved face move. The turnip smell mixes with smoke. A child looks at it and feels both fear and comfort, because fear is safer when it is given a form. Inside, the family returns to the hearth. The dumb supper plate still sits for a while. The offering is still there. The room is warm. Outside, the night remains open. Inside, the rules are clear. Welcome the dead with kindness. Confuse what is unkind. Seek a glimpse of the future, and then let it go. Hold close to fire. Hold close to each other. These small rituals were the grammar of Samhain. They are the roots of what later becomes Halloween. But before the night can cross into the modern world, it must pass through a long negotiation with a new faith that arrives on the same winds. And we will step into that negotiation next. After the dumb supper, some families kept the table as it was. The empty place stayed set. A candle burned low and made a small pool of light on the wood. Wax softened and ran down the side in slow lines. The room smelled of turf, smoke, and warm bread, and a faint cold smell that came in from the door cracks. Sometimes the family stepped to the doorstep for one quiet moment. They looked up at clouds moving across the moon. The air tasted of damp earth. A small bowl was set on the step. Then the door was closed gently, because loudness felt like an invitation. When the disguised groups went out, the lane changed texture. Hedges leaned in. A puddle held the moon in broken pieces. Straw brushed and hissed with each step. A mask pressed against a face and made the breath warmer inside it. At a gate, The group paused and listened. Then a hand lifted and knocked. A latch moved. A sliver of hearth light spilled out, and the masked faces looked more alive. A song was offered. Food was offered back. The door closed. The group moved on, and the night swallowed their footprints. The divination games stretched time in a gentle way. A tub of water was carried in and set down. Apples floated and turned slowly. Each person knelt, leaned forward, held breath, and tried to catch an apple with the teeth. Cold water touched lips. Laughter rose and then softened. The apple peel ritual was slower. A knife traveled around the fruit in a careful circle. The peel lengthened like a ribbon. When it fell to the floor, everyone leaned in to see the shape, and someone guessed a letter, and the future stayed unknown, but less frightening. Hazelnuts on the hearth had their own quiet drama. Two nuts placed close together. The fire crackled. The nuts darkened. Sometimes they burned steadily side by side. Sometimes they jumped apart, and people watched as if the flame could speak. And always the lanterns waited. Turnips were hard and dense. A knife worked for each cut. The turnip smell was sharp and earthy. A candle stump was placed inside. When the face finally glowed, it was not cheerful. It was meant to stare back at the dark. Set on a sill, it said, "This doorway is guarded." When the night grew late, masks were taken off. Straw cloaks were hung to dry. Boots were set near the hearth. The fire sank into embers. Breathing slowed. Samhain became less about fear and more about continuity, a small flame held against a wide winter. Soon a new faith would arrive with bells and saints and calendar days, and the old night would learn how to wear a new name without losing its older heartbeat. Before sleep, many listened, not only for footsteps, but for the small language of the house. A beam settling with a soft tick. A kettle lid cooling and clicking once. The faint scratch of a mouse in the thatch. These ordinary sounds were comforting, because they proved the world was still ordinary in places. A father might walk the room slowly. He would touch the door bar, making sure it sat firm. He would check the window shutter, feeling the rough wood under his fingers. He would glance at the lantern face on the sill and see the candle flutter, and he would feel calmer, because the flicker was a living thing. Then he would return to the hearth and stir the coals. A red glow would appear under the ash. He would place one small stick on top and watch it catch. The flame would rise a little, then settle. He would sit down. His boots would creak. He would let his shoulders drop. In some homes, a small portion of the offering was carried outside later. A child might go with an older hand guiding the shoulder. The door would open. Cold air would enter like water. They would step to the edge of the light and set the food down, then step back. No words, only the act. Then the door would close and the warmth would return, and the child would feel that a promise had been kept. When the torch was brought from the hill fire, the journey itself could feel like a ritual. The carrier held the flame close and walked slowly. Wind tried to pull the light sideways. The hand turned. The sleeve lifted. The flame was protected. Each step made a small sound in wet grass. At the corner of a field, the carrier paused and listened, then continued, because stopping too long felt unwise. At the home threshold, the torch dipped. Tinder caught. Smoke curled. Then flame returned to the hearth. The family watched until the new fire steadied, because steadiness was what they needed most at the beginning of winter. The year had turned. The house had a new fire. The night still carried mysteries, but the family had a circle of light, and that circle would guide them into the next layer of the story. The circle of light in the cottage could feel complete, but history does not let any circle stay untouched. A new faith arrived in the Gaelic world, carried by missionaries, by kings, by the slow tide of empire and conversion. It brought a single omnipotent God, new prayers, new stories of saints and martyrs, and a new way of naming the dead. The old ways did not vanish in one season. They were too old, and too woven into land and family. What followed was a long negotiation, a centuries-long conversation between the older world and the newer one. Not always peaceful, not always fair, but rarely a clean severing. People kept living in the same valleys. They still needed the same winter preparations. They still felt the same hinge in the year. So they adapted. They translated. They reinterpreted. You can imagine a chapel built near an older sacred place. A simple structure, wood and stone. A small bell that rang out over fields. On a misty morning, the bell sound rolled and softened, like smoke. Some villagers walked toward it. Others still walked toward a mound or a spring with quiet respect. Many did both, because people do not replace their inner world overnight. They layer it. In the Gaelic imagination, the other world had been a parallel realm, not a pit of punishment, not an eternal fire. It was a place of powerful beings and timeless youth, dangerous like a storm. Christian teaching brought different maps of the unseen, angels and demons, heaven and hell, purgatory, salvation, sin. These ideas did not simply erase the older ones. They pressed against them. Sometimes they merged. Sometimes they fought. Sometimes they stood side by side in the same mind. One of the first great changes was not a battle, but a realignment of time. The church sought a universal calendar, fixed holy days, a rhythm that could stretch across many lands. In the 9th century, a pope named Gregory IV designated the first day of November as All Saints' Day, a day to honor the multitude of saints and martyrs. Historians note that this decision was not necessarily made as a direct attack on Samhain. Still, the effect was profound. A major Christian holy day now sat directly on the old Gaelic hinge. Soon another layer was added. The second day of November became All Souls' Day, a day of prayer for the ordinary faithful dead, those believed to be in a state of purification. Together these days formed a 3-day season. The last night of October became the eve of the holy days, All Hallows' Eve. Over centuries, the words shortened and softened into a familiar modern sound, Halloween. For the church, this season was meant for vigils and prayer, for solemn remembrance, for a focus on Christian dead rather than the older other world. But the people did not simply abandon their customs. They repurposed them. Old forms filled with new meaning. The great hill bonfires did not always go out. In many places they were reconsecrated. Their light was said to honor saints, to guide souls, to stand against darkness in a Christian frame. A flame can carry many stories. A community that had always gathered around fire could keep gathering, even if the words spoken around the fire changed. The door-to-door visits also survived, but they shifted tone. The older guising and mumming had been camouflage and exchange, performance and protection. In the medieval Christian period, another practice grew: souling. Children and the poor went from house to house. They offered prayers for the souls of the dead relatives of the household. In return, they received food, often small cakes, spiced and marked with a cross. Soul cakes. The exchange remained. The route remained. The doorstep remained. But the meaning was rewritten. A prayer replaced the mask. Charity replaced the older toll to the night. You can picture it. A cold evening. A small group at a door. Their faces uncovered. Their breath in pale clouds. They sing a short prayer. The household listens. A hand reaches out with a small cake. The cake is warm from baking. The scent of spice rises, and the cross mark sits on top like a seal. The child takes it with both hands, careful, grateful. Then the group moves on. Footsteps soft on the path. It is gentle. It is also a sign of power, because the new faith has learned how to wear the old roads. For centuries, this blend of folk practice and official religion coexisted. Not perfectly. Sometimes a priest scolded a custom. Sometimes a village ignored the scolding. Sometimes a saint's story was placed on top of an older place name, like a thin cloth thrown over a stone. Still, the night remained, and people kept marking it, because winter kept arriving. Consider a village in the long Middle Centuries. Autumn rain falls and makes the lanes shiny. A priest stands near the chapel door and speaks of saints. His voice is calm, but firm. He says the dead should be remembered with prayer, not with fear. Then he walks away, and the villagers nod. And later that night, they still place a small bit of bread near the hearth, because habit is older than instruction. A mother teaches a child the new sign of the cross. Her finger traces it in the air. The child copies. Then the mother also tells the child to avoid the hollow hill after sunset, because some places still feel open. In one household, a saint name is spoken over a well, and in the next breath, the well is treated with the same old respect as before. Layer upon layer. A calendar day placed on top of an older seam. A chapel bell ringing over a field that still feels enchanted. On the eve night itself, the older silence sometimes remained. A family might eat more quietly than usual. They might set the extra place at the table and call it a place for souls in purgatory instead of ancestors from the other world. The plate is the same. The candle is the same. Only the explanation changes. This is what syncretism feels like. Not a clean trade, but a slow blending. The bonfire, too, could wear new words. A community gathers on a rise. Hands carry wood. Smoke rises, A priest might bless the flame. The people might still walk their animals near the warmth. Purification becomes protection for the Christian dead, and also remains the old desire to shake off bad luck before winter. The fire does not care what name you speak. It only burns, and warms, and gathers. Souling had its own gentle choreography. Children practice a short prayer. They keep the words in memory by repeating them softly while walking. At a door, they stand close together for courage. A knock. A pause. A door opens. Light spills out, warm and yellow. The household listens. The prayer is spoken. Then a hand offers a cake. The cake is small, but it carries meaning. A bite for the child. A prayer for the dead. A bond renewed between households. The child tucks the cake into a pouch and steps back into cold air, and the group moves on. In this way, the village keeps its circuit, door to door, like a slow heartbeat. Then the Reformation changes the tone of that circuit. A minister stands in the same doorway where soul cakes were once given and calls the practice idolatry. He calls it papist superstition. He warns that prayers for the dead are useless. He warns that masks and games invite evil. The words are sharper. The fear is sharper. Not fear of spirits alone, fear of being accused. Fear of being seen. A bonfire that once drew the whole district now becomes a risk. Someone whispers that watchers may come. Someone says fines will follow. Someone says worse. So the hill stays dark. The wind passes over it and finds nothing to carry. In the village, the night becomes smaller. A candle behind a shutter. A pot warming quietly. A child told to keep voice low. A song half remembered and then swallowed. Yet even when the public flame dies, the private ember remains. A household might still carve a turnip, but quickly, the knife works in silence. The candle is placed inside. The lantern is set not in the window, but on the floor near the door, hidden from the road. It still watches. Only the watching is secret now. When famine comes, the night takes on a new sorrow. A household that once had enough grain to brew now has only thin porridge. The bonfire wood is harder to spare. The offerings shrink. The empty chair at the table becomes heavier, because the dead are no longer distant ancestors. They are recent. A brother, a child, a neighbor, a name spoken in the mind and not aloud. The winter is not only seasonal now, it is personal. The departure ships gather those sorrows together. During the crossing, nights are long. Waves strike the hull with a steady thump. A lantern swings and throws moving shadows on faces. People dream of home. They dream of a hearth. They dream of a turnip face in a window. They dream of apples in water. Small images that keep the mind from falling apart. When they arrive, the land is different. The air smells different. The streets are louder. Still, the old night finds a corner to live in. A tenement room with one candle. A bowl of apples on a table. A story told to children so they will remember where they came from. The festival begins to speak with a new accent, but it is still the same hinge, and we will follow the hinge as it turns again. The ember that survived in private rooms was carried into a new century like a coal hidden in ash. In the old country, the old night had been pushed into quieter corners by reform and suspicion. But it did not disappear. It waited in small habits. A carved face made quickly. A bowl of apples set out when autumn air turned sharp. A story told in a low voice when children asked why the year felt different at the end of harvest. Then a larger darkness arrived. Not the darkness of spirits at the hedge, but the darkness of hunger. In the 19th century, Ireland was struck by the Great Famine. From 1845 to 1852, blight ruined the potato crop again and again. Families who depended on that crop watched their food soften and rot, then vanish. Some died. Many fled. The reasons and responsibilities are argued over in history, and policy and power mattered. But in a cottage, the experience was simple. A pot that should have been full was thin. A child that should have been noisy grew quiet. A field that should have promised spring felt empty. When people left, they did not leave as blank pages. They carried songs. They carried language. They carried the shape of their calendar. And they carried the old hinge night, even if it had already been pressed into Christian frames and pushed behind shutters. In crowded ports, in lines waiting to board ships, you could have seen small bundles and tired faces. You could have heard the sea and the cough of strangers. You could have smelled salt and smoke. And in the mind of someone stepping onto a ship, the memory of a hearth could be more vivid than the wood under their feet. The crossing itself was another threshold. A ship moves like a slow animal. The deck creaks. Water strikes the hull with a steady rhythm. Air is cold and damp. A lantern swings and makes shadows slide across faces. In cramped, dark holds, people breathed close to one another, and the sound of breathing became its own weather. There were prayers, and there were silences. There were memories that rose when sleep could not fully arrive. The old night of Samhain lived among those memories, not as a public festival now, but as a private thread, a way to remember the place that was being lost. When immigrants arrived in North America, they entered cities that felt louder and faster. Streets were crowded, languages mixed. Work was harsh. Still, in the narrow rooms of tenements, families made small islands of familiarity. A candle on a table, a bowl of apples, a pot on a small stove. Children listening to stories of the old country. In that setting, the autumn night remained, but it changed scale. It became domestic. It became a way to keep continuity in a land where everything else felt unfamiliar. In those rooms, people bobbed for apples in a wash tub. Water rippled and reflected candlelight. A child leaned forward, breath held, and laughter came out when the apple slipped away. A grandmother peeled an apple slowly, trying to keep the peel unbroken, letting it fall, and then guessing a letter. Ghost stories were told, not with shrieks, but with a soft thrill, because fear can be safer when you hold it in a story. These were fragments of older divination and older listening, turned into family play, but still carrying the older shape. The lantern changed too. In Ireland and Scotland, the carved turnip had been the watcher at the door. Turnips were dense and pale, hard to carve, and their faces looked grim when lit from within. In North America, turnips were not always common, but another harvest fruit was abundant: the pumpkin. It was larger. It was softer. It was easier to hollow and cut, so the face in the window became orange and wide. The knife moved more easily. The candle fit inside, with room to spare. By an accident of agriculture, the American lantern was born. That change mattered more than it seems. The pumpkin carried a different mood. Its color was bright. Its size was generous. Its flesh invited playful shapes, smiles rather than snarls. The old protective ward softened into something that could be funny. The doorway still had a glowing face, but the face began to grin. A symbol that had once stared back at the dark now became a sign of harvest cheer as well. Printed images began to show children carrying carved pumpkins, and the emblem spread until it became the center of the holiday. Other customs were shifting at the same time. Door-to-door visiting remained, but the spiritual framing weakened in the new secular landscape. Souling and guising blurred and simplified. The exchange became lighter. A child at a door, a small demand, a small reward. Over the early 20th century, a phrase appeared that captured the new mood: trick or treat. Early reports appear in Canada in the late 1910s, and in the United States by the 1930s. The words were simple and catchy, perfect for a new world that liked slogans. The phrase also carried an older shadow. In the older night, offerings were given to keep danger away and to honor the dead. Now the danger became a joke. The wandering spirit became a child in a costume. The offering became candy. A treat. The deep grammar of the old exchange flattened into a small transaction that could be repeated on every porch. As the 20th century moved on, the night gained a new problem: mischief. In many towns, Halloween became associated with vandalism and pranks. Fences moved. Windows soaked. Small chaos spread. Not sacred chaos now, but civic annoyance. Communities answered with a very modern solution: organized fun. Town parties, parades, costume contests. A way to channel restless energy into supervised space. It was another version of the old idea of framing disorder so the community could survive it. After the Second World War, another change accelerated everything: the suburban boom. Bright neighborhoods, sidewalks, front lawns, a culture of children moving door to door in safer-looking streets. Trick-or-treating exploded in popularity in the 1950s, and where children went, companies followed. Candy makers saw a market. They produced small, individually wrapped pieces and advertised them directly to families. Television showed smiling children receiving brand-name sweets. The expectations shifted. Homemade treats and fruit became less common. Factory candy became the standard. Then, fear returned in a new shape. Not fear of the otherworld, but fear of strangers. Urban legends spread about poisoned candy, about needles and blades hidden inside apples. Media amplified the panic. Parents grew anxious. The solution seemed obvious: Only factory-sealed candy felt safe. Later research has found little evidence for the classic story of random strangers harming children through Halloween treats, with rare tragic cases linked to family crime rather than unknown attackers. Still, the myth did its work. It pushed the holiday further toward industrial packaging and away from homemade exchange. By the end of the 20th century, Halloween had become a massive industry. Seasonal aisles bright with plastic masks. Bags of candy stacked like offerings to a new altar. Decorations mass-produced and smiling. The night that once asked people to face winter and the dead now often asked a simpler question. What costume will you wear? What candy will you buy? The old gods were not smashed. They were forgotten under wrappers and plastic. The ancient dread became a playful thrill, then became a purchase. Yet even here, the story does not end. Because a tradition that old does not die cleanly. It fractures. One layer becomes loud and commercial. Another layer stays quiet and keeps beating beneath. Let us slow down and sit in one of those immigrant rooms for a while. A window rattles with wind. Outside the street is loud. Carts and boots and voices in languages that pile on each other. Inside there is a table with a scarred surface. A candle burns low and makes a small pool of light. Wax runs in slow lines down the side and hardens again. A child traces one cooled line with a fingertip and feels the ridge. The mother pulls the hand away gently, not angry, just careful. Because fire is precious. A bowl of apples sits near the candle. The apples are not perfect. Some have bruises. Some have spots where the skin has softened. But they smell sweet and sharp. They smell like harvest, like the last good thing before winter. A kettle warms, and the lid trembles and clicks once, then settles. That clicking becomes part of the room music, along with the faint hiss of the candle wick. The family decides to bob for apples. A wash tub is brought in. Water sloshes and reflects the candle in broken pieces. An apple is set in and it floats, turning slowly. A child kneels, hands behind the back, and leans forward. The water is cold. The child hesitates. Then the child dips the face and tries to catch the apple. It slips away. Water runs from the chin. Everyone laughs quietly. The laughter is not wild. It is a small relief, a way to say that the year is hard, but the house still holds warmth. Now picture the lantern making in this new place. A pumpkin sits on the table. It is heavy. Its skin is smooth and cool. A child runs a hand over the curved surface and feels the slight ridges. A knife is brought out. The father presses the blade into the pumpkin top and turns it carefully. The cut makes a soft sound, the skin giving way. When the lid lifts, a faint scent rises, wet and earthy. Seeds cling and shine. Strings of pulp stretch and break. Hands reach inside. Seeds and pulp are scraped out. The shell is hollowed for light. Then the face is chosen. In the old country, the face was meant to frighten. Here, the face can be mischievous. A triangle eye. A wide grin. A tooth that looks silly. The knife cuts easily, Small orange pieces fall on the table. The child collects them like treasure. When the candle is placed inside and lit, the whole face glows. The light is warm and friendly. The window holds a bright orange circle. For a moment, the street outside seems less harsh, because this window is speaking in a language of home. This is the turning point. The ancient protective ward becomes a symbol of harvest and play. The door is still a threshold, but the feeling changes. The threshold becomes an invitation rather than a warning. As neighborhoods grew and people moved into streets with many doors, the porch became a stage. The child could move from one house to another with less fear. The night became a community event again, but a different kind of community. Not a clan gathering on a hill. A grid of families in separate houses, linked by sidewalks. Picture a suburban street in the 1950s. Porch lights glow. Children in thin store costumes walk door to door. A knock. A smile. Candy drops into a bucket. The phrase "trick or treat" is spoken, and the group moves on. This repeating shape is familiar if you look beneath the surface. It is the old circuit of visiting. It is the old exchange. It is guising and souling turned into a simple request. A prayer becomes a phrase. A soul cake becomes a miniature candy bar. A protective offering becomes a treat. Then the poisoned candy story spread and changed behavior. It is one of the strangest modern myths, because it uses the old fear of a dangerous night, but points it at neighbors rather than spirits. The fear is powerful because it touches a real anxiety. The feeling that modern life is anonymous, that doors you knock on might hide strangers you do not truly know. The evidence for the classic story is weak, but the story spreads anyway, because stories often spread when they fit a feeling. A wrapper becomes a talisman. A sealed package becomes a ward. Factory candy becomes the only acceptable offering. In a way, the old apotropaic logic returns. Protection through a chosen object, not a turnip face, a tamper-proof seal. By this point, the modern Halloween looks far from Samhain. Still, if you sit quietly and listen, you can hear echoes. A night when rules loosen. A night when people wear other faces. A night when doorways matter. A night when offerings are exchanged. A night when fear is acknowledged but contained. The old soul seems buried, but it is not gone. It is waiting beneath the bright surface. And as we move into the final part, we will see that some people began to dig gently, not with shovels, but with memory, with study, with candlelight and quiet ritual, trying to find the older heartbeat again. The bright mask of modern Halloween can fill an entire street, but beneath bright porches and candy wrappers there is often a quiet hunger. You can feel it when the costume comes off and the house goes still. You can feel it when the last child goes to bed and the bucket of candy sits in a corner like a small leftover altar. You know that feeling when a celebration ends and the room suddenly sounds larger? That is where the older night sometimes returns. In the latter half of the 20th century, many people began looking for what had been lost. Not everyone was satisfied with spectacle. Some wanted the older questions again. Questions about death and memory, about winter and endurance, about the thinness between the living and the dead. a modern spiritual movement grew, often called modern paganism. It includes many paths, and not all agree on details. Some people follow Wicca. Some follow Celtic Reconstructionism. Some gather in ways that are personal and quiet. What connects them is the desire to relight an older fire in a modern world. For these practitioners, Samhain became one of the great turning points on a wheel of the year. They spoke of it as a Celtic New Year, a moment of death and rebirth, the last harvest and the first deep dark. They did not claim a perfect, unbroken line from the Iron Age. Honestly, many are careful to say it is a modern act of spiritual archaeology. Fragments gathered from folklore. Old texts read with caution. Rituals rebuilt with love. A conscious effort to make meaning rather than pretend nothing was broken. If you were standing with me in one of these modern gatherings, it might not be on a misty Irish hill. It might be in a suburban living room with curtains drawn. It might be in a quiet clearing at the edge of a park. Candles would be placed on the ground. A small bowl of water might sit near them, reflecting flame. Leaves gathered from a yard might be arranged in a circle. The air would smell of wax and damp earth. Voices would be low. Breathing would slow. An ancestor altar might be built. Photographs of loved ones set beside a candle. A small piece of bread. A cup of wine or tea. Sometimes symbols like skull images appear, not as decoration for fright, but as a reminder that death belongs to the same chain as life. The altar is a place to look, a place to remember names without rushing, a place to say, "You are still with us in some way." Some revive the dumb supper, a meal prepared carefully, a chair left empty, food placed on a plate for the dead, the meal eaten in silence. No music, no talking, only the soft sound of chewing, the small click of a spoon, the faint tick of a candle. Listening becomes the main action. Not listening for terror, listening for closeness. Listening for the feeling that the dead are not only absent, divination returns too, not always with apples and hazelnuts, sometimes with tarot cards, sometimes with a mirror used for scrying, sometimes with a simple bowl of water held still until the mind can see its own reflection clearly. The point is not certainty. The point is the same old desire, to bring a small measure of order to the unknown future, to make winter feel like a passage rather than a wall. At the same time, another kind of revival rose in the old country, more cultural than religious. In Ireland and Scotland, renewed pride in Gaelic heritage grew. The ancient festival became a symbol of identity. Public celebrations were created, not as ancient worship, but as modern art and shared memory. One famous example is the Samhain Fire Festival in Edinburgh. On a cold autumn night, crowds gather on Calton Hill. Drums beat. Torchbearers move in long lines. Costumes show the courts of summer and winter. A ritual battle is staged. Then a massive bonfire is lit, and the hill glows like an old story told in a new accent. If you stand on a hill like that, even in the modern era, the body still understands. Wind moves hard. Fingers grow cold. Faces turn toward flame. Smoke rises and makes the air taste of ash. The circle forms again. A community gathers at the hinge of the year. And for a moment, the old logic feels present. Light against darkness. Warmth against cold. Togetherness against isolation. In this globalized world, it is also important to be precise. Themes of honoring the dead are universal, but traditions are specific. Modern Halloween is often confused with Dia de los Muertos. Both involve ancestors. Both involve offerings. Still, their roots are different. Dia de los Muertos comes from the syncretism of ancient Mesoamerican belief and Spanish Catholic practice. Samhain comes from Gaelic seasonal and otherworld traditions and its later Christian layering in the British Isles. To blend them carelessly is to erase the histories that give each its power. Now we return to the question that opened this story. What became of the ancient soul of Samhain? The answer is not that it vanished. The answer is that it fractured. Today, two festivals share the same night. There is the bright, modern Halloween, loud and playful, a holiday of costumes, porch lights, and candy. It asks little beyond participation. It offers a controlled thrill. It sells masks that can be thrown away, and beneath it there is the older heartbeat. It beats in a quiet candle-lit room where a person speaks the name of someone they miss. It beats in a silent meal with an empty chair. It beats in a small offering set by a doorway, not for a trick, but for remembrance. It beats in drums on a windy hill where a bonfire rises, and people feel the season turn in their skin. The forms have changed. The names have changed. Still, the human impulse remains. The need to face darkness without collapsing. The need to honor the chain of the dead and the living. The need to gather and share warmth when winter begins. So when you see a carved face glowing in a window, you can let it mean more than a decoration. You can let it be a small guardian. A small memory of a night when the world felt thin at the edges. A night when people did not pretend the dark was harmless, but they met it with fire and community and careful ritual. And when you hear children at a door asking for candy, you can hear a faint echo of older exchanges, offerings once made at thresholds, words once spoken for souls, masks once worn to move safely through a living landscape. If you are listening in bed right now, you can take what you need from both layers. You can keep the softness. You can keep the calm. You can let the dread dissolve into stillness. Outside, the season turns as it always has. Inside, you have a small circle of warmth. A breath in, a breath out, a candle of attention held steady. The night does not need to be conquered. It only needs to be crossed. And you have crossed it before, in your own life, in your own seasons, leaving one version of yourself behind and stepping into another, quietly, without announcing it to the world. Let us linger in the modern room a little longer, because small rooms are where old traditions hide and heal. The lights are off. Only candles burn. One candle is placed in a glass jar. Its flame bends when someone walks past, then straightens. Another candle sits on a saucer. Wax pools around the base and hardens in pale layers. The room smells of warm wax and a faint trace of smoke from the wick. On a table there is a cloth, dark-colored, soft under the fingertips. Someone smooths the cloth slowly, as if smoothing time itself. A photograph is set down, then adjusted again, until it sits straight. A name is spoken in a voice that almost whispers. No dramatic calling, just a name. Then another name. Then another. Each name is followed by a small pause, long enough for a memory to rise, then long enough for it to settle. A bowl of water is placed near the candles. The water is still. The surface holds reflections of flame as long golden shapes. When a hand moves nearby, the reflection trembles, then returns. Someone dips 2 fingers into the bowl and touches the dampness to the forehead. The gesture is simple. It marks a threshold. It says, I am here. I am present. I am listening. Bread is broken, not rushed. A crust cracks softly. The inside is warm and pale. A small piece is placed on the altar. A cup is filled. If it is wine, it catches candlelight and glows. If it is tea, steam rises and disappears. The offering is not a bargain. It is a sign of respect. Then the dumb supper begins. Plates are set out. One plate remains untouched for the living. A chair is pulled close to the table and left empty. The chair does not look dramatic. It looks ordinary. That is what makes it powerful. An ordinary chair waiting for someone who cannot sit in it. The family, or the small circle, sits down. They do not speak. They begin to eat. The silence is a texture. At first it feels awkward. Then it becomes calm. The mind stops chasing words. The body hears other sounds. A fork touches a plate and makes a soft note. A glass is set down. A swallow. A breath. A floorboard settling. The heating system of a modern house clicking once. A distant car passing outside and fading. In that silence, the idea of the veil feels close, not because anyone sees a figure, but because attention sharpens. A memory moves through the mind with more detail. A hand remembered. A laugh remembered. A voice remembered. Grief is present, but it is gentle here. It is held by ritual and by warmth. After the meal, some people speak again. Others keep quiet longer. Some write names on paper and burn the paper in a safe bowl, watching smoke lift. Some place a small stone beside each photo, 1 stone for each person remembered. Stones gather weight the way names gather weight. A smooth stone is turned in a palm. The stone holds coolness. The palm holds warmth. The difference feels like the difference between the living and the dead. Close, not hostile, simply different. Divination in this setting is slow. A deck of cards is shuffled. The sound is soft. Paper sliding on paper. Hands cut the deck. 1 card is turned over. A picture appears. A symbol. A figure. The group does not rush to claim certainty. They talk softly about what the image reminds them of. They let the card be a mirror rather than a verdict. Or a mirror is used directly. A dark mirror. A bowl of water. A candle held behind it. The surface catches light and also catches the viewer's own eyes. Staring becomes a kind of meditation. The mind projects and then withdraws. The future remains unknown. Still, the act gives the unknown a frame. Now shift to the hill in Scotland again, because the hill is another kind of room. Calton Hill rises above the city. Stone underfoot. Grass damp. Wind strong enough to make cheeks sting. People gather in coats and scarves. Their breath turns white in the air. Drums begin, slow at first, then steadier. Each beat is felt in the chest. The crowd moves as one body, turning to look where torches appear. Torchbearers walk in lines. Flame moves in the wind. A torch makes a small roar. Smoke trails behind it and is pulled away. Costumes appear, bright in firelight. Some represent summer, lighter colors, flowing shapes. Some represent winter, darker shapes, heavier silhouettes. The story is enacted without needing old belief. It is art, and it is heritage, and it still touches something ancient, because the body remembers seasons whether or not the mind believes in spirits. When the great bonfire is lit, heat rolls outward. People step back, then step forward again. Hands lift to warm palms. Faces turn golden. Eyes reflect flame. A child looks up and does not look away. For a moment, the whole hill feels like the old Samhain hill, a community gathered at the turning, making light together. This is what I mean when I say the soul did not die. It moved. It changed clothes. It found new rooms. It found new language. Still, the hinge remains. If you are tired tonight, you do not need to solve the whole history in your mind. You can let it settle like dust. You can imagine the old hill fire and the modern porch light as two small points of warmth. You can imagine the cave mouth and the urban legend as two different faces of fear. You can imagine the dumb supper and the candy bowl as two different offerings placed at a threshold. In the end, the winter comes either way. The days grow shorter. The light thins. The air cools. Still, the human response can be gentle. A candle. A name spoken softly. A shared meal. A walk outside with warm breath and a calm mind. Now take a slow breath in. Let it out. Let your hands relax. Let your tongue rest in your mouth. Let your eyes grow heavy. The story has followed a long path, from Gaelic hills and mounds, through church calendars and reformers' bands, through famine ships, through pumpkin light, through candy aisles, and back into candle-lit rooms where people still listen for the dead with tenderness. The path is long. The night is quiet. Let the fire settle. Let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts grow slow and gentle. Good night.